Hello and welcome to Inside the Museum podcast. My name's Tonya, I'm the co-host along with Anna. This is our most recently recorded edition. Unfortunately, we had some issues with the sound quality and Rob in particular is very, very quiet. We've edited it to the best of our abilities, but we hope you enjoy it anyway. Hello everyone and welcome to the fourth episode of Inside the Museum, the podcast coming to you from Tudor House virtually. And, my name's Tonya, I'm the manager of the museum, and also with me is Anna.
Hello, I'm the engagement officer at the museum.
Tim.
Hi, I'm a volunteer who likes to do research.
And Rob.
Hello, I helped with the research just up to before the first lockdown.
So Anna, how are you? What you are currently with me just back off sick leave and Abby furloughed. You are pretty much the only member of the team holding the fort for us. You're our public face at the moment. How's it been?
It has been good, and I have to say the only good thing about sort of being the last man standing, so to speak, is that whilst Tudor House is of course wonderful and everybody should come and visit as soon as we are open, it is slightly creepy to be in a 16th century building totally by yourself. So if I do have to be, as I say, the last man standing, I am glad that I can do it from home, where I'm not going to be the only one. And also we are recording this on the 26th of January. We've just had a shed load of snowfall, and again, being in a modern centrally heated house and not ones where you kind of lift up the floorboards and see the cracks down to the street below, really nice, really interesting, really cold also, so there are some benefits to this whole lockdown business.
I have to say, of all the heritage buildings I've worked in, Tudor House is the least creepy.
Oh really?
I'm not phased about being there at all on my own. The one that used to bother me, the very first museum job I had, was at the Almonry Museum in Evesham, which is a 14th century Grade 1 listed building that used to be part of the abbey that was in Evesham. It was quite a large abbey, influential in its time. It was a beautiful, beautiful building. But there were corners of that where I was just, and I'm not a ghost botherer. I don't necessarily believe in them. I don't try and find them. But there were areas of that building I was uncomfortable in, and had possibly my only unexplained encounter where I was trying to do telemetry readings, which is where you measure the temperature and humidity and light factors to make sure that your collection is all safe. And I was stood in front of a case with my little device measuring the readings, and somebody who wasn't there pulled my hair, actual physical tug, to which I turned around and said, well, you can pack that in, and then ran up the stairs.
Oh my goodness. Oh my gosh, I think that would have been it. I would have just quit my job at that point.
We used to have ghost hunts overnight, and they would work themselves up into a state of hysteria, and I'd be watching Friends or something in the office, trying to pretend to be normal and unbothered by it, and then I'd have to lock up at 4 a.m. after they'd all gone and think, yeah, I'm really not comfortable.
Oh gosh,
radio on very loud.
Yes, yeah, there is something about it, because like you say, Tudor House, it doesn't really have that creepy vibe at all. And like you, I am not a ghost person in any way, but just before Christmas, when we were still working on site, I had to go down to the cellars at Tudor House for something, which we just mostly use them for storage. They're not terribly exciting, but whilst I was down there, someone turned a tap on in the kitchen, and because there is the water pipes of the building run sort of in the ceiling of the cellar, there was this enormous whoosh from someone just turning the tap on, and you could not see me for dust getting out of that cellar, I have to say, just because even though I knew what it was, I was straight up those steps like someone was chasing me, because there was something about old buildings and strange noises that just makes even the most sort of cynical non-believers of us want to kind of cower
Yeah.
under the stairs or something. Yeah.
It's the Scooby-Doo syndrome. You know, in theory, that there's nothing to worry about, but you can't actually quite be sure.
Evil janitor, isn't it, in
Yeah.
Scooby-Doo?
Yes.
Have an evil janitor.
If only. Maybe that'll be my next job, the evil janitor.
So speaking of work, we are all working from home for the foreseeable. Obviously, the government regulations mean that we can't open, which is of course totally understandable. We all want to see the back of this virus, and actually I have spoken to a couple of volunteers from the museum who have said already that they have had their first shot of the vaccine, which is wonderful. We are all really pleased to hear that.
Mhm.
The downside is the lovely displays that in the last podcast we said, oh yes, they're all ready to go, and in January they're going to be installed, and then in February we're going to have the grand reopening. Not so much, unfortunately.
No, actually, I had a conversation with Jim, the chairman, this morning, who you may remember from the first podcast. And we were talking about the displays and getting the boards in, and it will be February, middle of February, before we can install them. And then we just keep our fingers crossed that we can do some kind of socially distanced, very regimented grand opening then, but we don't know. We just roll with it. It might be that we have to do a virtual kind of
Sorry.
What's binging at you?
Yes, there we go. Joys of working from home. There we go.
Unexplained things. Yeah, so we just have to roll with it and see what we can do. But it is exciting. I will hopefully put on our social media, but I'm showing you guys, this is what one of the boards will look like, back to front, unfortunately for you, but yeah.
The cocktails.
Well done. Yeah, so we worked with a wonderful illustrator and artist based in Worcester called Sarah Millin, and she's created us these fantastic drawings that look like 16th century woodcuts that we can use, and you've got the text, and you've got this beautiful illuminated letter at the top of the script, and then our little logo at the bottom. Branding is all important, just in case people are walking around the museum and they forget where they are. Yeah.
Yes, and I'll put a link in the description to the social media post with that on, so you can go and have a look and see what all of our boards are going to look like. And it's really exciting, actually.
Yeah, they do look amazing. And the team we've been working with at Heritage Insider, they've pulled out all the stops for us and edited down my vast text.
Edited down from our vast research, no doubt.
Yeah. I think I ended up with something like 30 pages of initial text, and it's been edited down to a nice tight 18 pages. So yeah, what has been edited out can go into the guidebook, which I shall start writing shortly. I'm quite intimidated by the fact that I'm going to write a guidebook for the first time ever. I know. And I can put all that information back in that got edited out. So yeah, it's really exciting, and we are getting there. It's just having to move more slowly than we would have planned, but there's no point railing against it or wishing that things were different. We are where we are. So yeah, I'm quite pleased with the progress we've made regardless.
Yes, and also what is really nice is that, like you say, we have all this wonderful information that, you know, actually we have too much, as is always the case with research, but it is really exciting to have too much information about a period of history that you can't just go and, you know, look at the census and see, you know, how many children someone had and when they were born and all the rest of it. You actually have to go to various other records that I think we will talk about a little bit later on in today's podcast, but it is hard work to find out a lot about the specific families who lived in Tudor House in the 16th century, because although they were sort of, you know, fairly well to do, they're not aristocracy, they're not people who are leaving us piles of letters or diaries or other things in archives.
Unfortunately, during the sealing work, no 16th century document turned up, or diary turned up, which would have been amazing. It's incredibly hard, and it's not something I particularly have the patience or the right skill set. You know, I go into Ancestry, I type a name, and I just want the stuff to appear magically on screen without having to do any digging, and that just doesn't happen with the type of records that we're dealing with. So to have this plethora of information, that is one of my favorite words ever, I think, plethora, to have all this information to work with is a real treat. Actually, we weren't starting from nothing, but you know, we had very limited information, so it's been a real, like I say, a treat to come up with to find all of this, and to be able to use it and to put names to the building and to say, yes, this person lived here at this time and this is what they did and this is what their life would have been like. It's brilliant. It really brings it to life. It's not just bricks and mortar, as exciting as bricks and mortar can be.
Yes,
Portland,
absolutely.
Auburn timber, I think you mean.
Portland, Auburn timber and all the rest of it.
Yes, because also as well, like you say, we have found specific details about the people who lived here, and we will come on to some of that later, but we have done the proper research, and this is not to say that people who came here sort of 5-10 years before weren't doing proper research, but as part of another project that I have been working on for the museum, I went and had a look at the information that was put together by Richard Cadbury, or one of his associates, when he owned the building in the early 1900s. And he put together a little sort of pamphlet about Tudor House, and some of the kind of the tall tales that are in that pamphlet. There's a lovely bit at the end where it says the building, we think, was once owned by the city marshal, and there's just no evidence of that whatsoever, and he clearly put it in to make it sound quite sort of grand, but
Yeah.
there's no evidence of that, nothing at all, but also no evidence as to where he got that information. So some of what we had to work with was similarly unsourced and kind of came to us with big kind of question marks written next to it. So it has been really nice to actually go out and find, you know, fact from fiction, and also to be able to say that for future researchers working at the museum, you know, here is where this information is from. If you want to go and have a look, this is where you can go and look at it, rather than going, oh, well, someone once said, and I overheard from so and so, and a bloke down the pub told me that.
Rumour and hearsay.
Yes.
It's amazing how prevalent it is, though, because it's just easier to work to build something from rumour and hearsay, and you know. This monk was obviously a bad monk because this happened. So I'm going back to previous sources, but yeah, to actually be able to say, do you know what, this is the evidence for what we have, is it's lovely, and does make the job of future researchers a bit easier, hopefully. But I must admit, I set the research team that Tim and Rob are part of a bit of a task, in that I said, it's not, I'm specifically looking for information on Tudor women and not royalty. I don't want to know about royalty. Hampton Court Palace already do that beautifully. We don't need to copy them. So finding out about 16th century women, normal women, is quite tricky, and they'll probably curse me later as we talk more about it.
Yeah.
So Anna, whilst you've been the last man standing, you've been doing all sorts of amazing things, including your talks. How have they been going? I gather we have a regular listener to them all the way from Vancouver.
We do, which is absolutely brilliant. So what I do is, and I will, again, this is details I will put in the sort of the description of the podcast if you want to come along and see us live, the unedited version. You can hear all my mistakes. No, we have each month we have a different theme for the talks, and this month we looked at Tudor House behind the beams. I won't stop saying that because I've never come up with such a good pun in my life, and that was actually really nice because we looked at the architectural history of Tudor House. So it was nice to go back through all the little photos and videos I've got of all the really interesting carpenter's marks, cellars, attics, what have you. So that was really nice to do. If you missed it, keep an eye on our YouTube channel. In fact, I think the video will have gone up before this podcast goes out. So again, I will just link it below. And if you would like to have a look at Tudor House, either because you haven't visited us before, or you're a regular visitor but you are missing us during lockdown, there'll be plenty of times to actually see the, to actually see the building there. And if you want to join us next month, we are going to be exploring Mr. Cadbury, who I mentioned before, telling his tall tales about the building. But he is Cadbury of chocolate fame, if you didn't know. And if you want to know what that has to do with Tudor House in Worcester, well, you'll have to come along to the talk to find out. Well, we have brought Tim and Rob here today to talk about the actual process of doing the research for these new boards. But before we do that, we would like to bring back our regular feature with Tim, and that is our breakneck biography. Because as Tonya mentioned, the sort of the purpose of the research that we did for our new displays was really to focus in on the Tudor residents of Tudor House. But obviously, having been here since the 16th century, we have many later residents too. And Tim does a lot of really fantastic, and I should say very well sourced, very well evidenced research.
Agreement.
Yes, into these previous residents. But I think for the first time, I don't know who we're going to be visiting today. So, Tim, who is on the line, so to speak, to hear about today?
Okay, well, it's going to be a long preamble, so don't start my timer yet. I'm very, very precious of my 120 seconds. When you first asked me to do these, you said breakneck bio, try and add something, a bit of humour in there to lighten it up. I don't think you realise how difficult it is, because humour doesn't generally get recorded in the historical record. Sometimes you might get lucky. You can always probably think of famous historical events that raise a little laugh, but in general it's pretty dry: names, dates of births, marriages and deaths, etc. So I feel I probably failed quite a lot on that. To give you a funny fact, the delivery sometimes raises a chuckle, which is probably more by accident than design. And unfortunately, the one story I would like to tell, which has jokes we can make about it, if we put it that way, recently uncovered, was George Romeo Bosworth. And if you've been following our Facebook and Instagram channels, you heard or read a small summary of that.
That's a name
but he
with delusions of grandeur.
He didn't actually live at Tudor House. He only rented it for a short while. So he didn't meet the criteria, because another criteria that I was given was it must be people who lived here. So I can't tell you about George Bosworth. I can't tell you the fact that he had probably 13 children. And I can't tell you that he went bankrupt after spending £20 on refitting the shop and blamed it on, yes, the 13 children, but also the fact that Tudor House is on the wrong side of the street. I can't tell you any of that because he doesn't meet the criteria.
But that can, of course, be our new tagline for the museum.
Absolutely.
Museum on the wrong side of the street.
Yeah, come to Tudor House. We're on the wrong side.
Well, we are, because we're not on the same side as Greyfriars, and everybody makes that mistake. So instead, I've just gone with the plodding chronological theme. Last time we talked about Mcarthur Wood from the 1870s up to 1890s. This time I'm going to talk about William Walker, who was the landlord of the Cross Keys Inn, 1906 to 1909, but not really about his time in the Cross Keys Inn, but how it all ended, which is what we know the most about. And at this point, I have to say, I have to give you a trigger warning or a trauma warning. So I wrote this out so I get the words right. The following podcast may contain content that some listeners might find upsetting or disturbing.
They might have found the entire podcast upsetting.
So up to this point, yes, probably. It deals with a tragic accident and ultimately death. So if you think that you are a bit squeamish or you don't want to hear about that, or it might cause you upset, then fast forward 2.5 minutes, I would recommend.
Okay.
And then it'll be all over.
As it was for
the unfortunate. Okay, then, are we ready to start the time? You're going to count me down?
Yeah. 3, 2, 1.
Right, so today I'm talking about William Walker, who was landlord of the Cross Keys 1906 to 1909, and how it all ended for him. He was what I like to think of as a career publican. Lots of the people we see at the Cross Keys come in, very short period, and then disappear again. And anybody who sticks around tends to have another job as well. so they publican on the side, and that's from the very beginning right up until the end of the Victorian era. But William Walker, he was the publican across the Crown Inn down the road in 1896, and before that over in St John's in the Herefordshire House, and he just seems to have moved from pub to pub selling his wares. Like I say, I'm going to talk about the end rather than his careers in the pub, and it all ended one night, Saturday the 28th of March 1908. The Cross Keys brewed its own beer, which is quite unusual for the period, not particularly unusual, but the big breweries are in, and the brewer hadn't turned up. So William contacted his friend, a gentleman called Herbert John Digger, who lived over in St John's, who he knew had grown up in a pub, and said, come over and help me. And Digger, as we should call him, did do such, and they lit the fires at about 6 o'clock and got the brews brewing. And later in the evening, the brewer still hadn't appeared, so they decided to continue the process. Unfortunately, the process involved climbing rickety stairs, carrying heavy sacks of malt and whatever, pouring that into a huge vat of the boiling mash. And poor old Digger did this, lost his footing, fell into the mash, which was boiling 180 Fahrenheit, which in centigrade is, of course, 100, and was seriously injured. William Walker managed to drag him out, but he died the following day. His wife, Ellen Digger, was not happy with this and so sued, and William went bankrupt and had to leave. He had to leave, he lost his license, and you'd think that would have been it, but no, Agnes, his wife, took over, and he continued as a publican for the rest of his life, as well as you can tell. And to rub insult into injury, one of his pubs was just across the road from where Ellen Digger and the family lived. So every day of her life, she probably saw William Walker's pub across the road, instrument of her husband's death. There you go. I'm well over the 2 minutes this time, but I'll leave it at that.
You are, but I think we wanted you to keep going because that rather gory story, but very amusingly told, I would say, is I think the only death that we know of at Tudor House. So it is worth sharing, if only so that poor old Digger did not die in vain.
Yeah, the only death of that
actually
kind,
recorded. Well, he didn't die there because he actually got to hospital. But there are lots of people who died whilst resident, so probably did die in their beds in Tudor House, but we can't prove that.
Hello, Anna from the future here. When I was editing the podcast, I realised that we jumped straight from Tim's wonderful biography of William Walker and the hapless Digger to our new research in a way that might be slightly confusing to our lovely audience to follow. So just to fill in the gaps a little bit here, over the past couple of years, the museum has been really lucky to gain various bits of funding that have allowed us to go rootling around in the archives with a team of volunteers, of which Tim and Rob were a really, really integral part, to do a lot of research into prior residents of the museum, quite a few of whom you've now heard about through our Breakneck biography feature. We wanted this month's feature to be Tim and Rob telling us about the actual research process, how they got involved with Tudor House and what they actually did as part of the research, rather than simply the historic residents that we found out about. So that's where we're going to pick back up, with the discussion of where the funding to do this actual research originally came from. So now back to your regularly scheduled podcasting. And when this first began, I hadn't actually started at Tudor House. So Tonya, how did this begin? Did you just sort of put out a plea, if anybody would like to be involved in this research, sign up, and then you had the wonderful Tim and Rob, or how did it work?
Yeah, it was actually, I spotted a grant from the West Midlands Museum Development Team, and that was, I can't remember the name of it now. They are an amazing little group of people who work with funding from Arts Council England to support museums around the West Midlands area. And one of their grants was to bring hidden stories to life. And at that point, I already was aware of the paucity, the just lack of information we had about women in Tudor times, and specifically in Tudor House. and the grant could be used to pay for an expert to work with a team of volunteers. So I contacted my local expert, who is Jenny Waugh, who you may remember from podcast episode number 2, who used to be an archivist down in Surrey. So she knows her way around an archive. She now does kind of freelance evaluation and engagement work. So she's used to working with volunteers and passing her knowledge and skills on. And then just put a call out for people who were interested. Tim and Rob, I think you were there at the starting line, and we had some students from the university join us as well. Jenny had, I think, in total 3 sessions with you all, talking about how to delve into archives, what to look for. She introduced you to the people who run the Cathedral Library. The Worcester Cathedral has an amazing library and archive all of its own, which one day I will make the time to go and look at, just because I love books, and I fully expect to just stand there in the middle of the room going, oh, I want these books. Yes, weeping silently. Yeah, so she did all of that and set everybody off in the right direction, I think. And then by that time, we'd received also the money from the National Lottery Heritage Fund, and we could divert some of that off into the research and being able to use it for the new interpretation. So it all kind of snowballed from this little £3,000 grant from West Midlands Museum Development into this much bigger thing. And it wasn't until I'd articulated what I wanted people to look for, specifically women, that I was made aware of just how difficult that was going to be, because Tudor women got recorded at the time of birth, marriage and death. They rarely owned businesses. They've never held positions in council or local government unless they were queen. And I very much did not want to do royalty. I wanted this to be about normal people. We forget that not everyone was Queen Elizabeth or Henry VIII, or Thomas Cromwell or anyone of that level of influence. At the same time they were operating, there were normal people living their lives, raising their children, trying to make the best of a very restricted society. And that was what I wanted to bring out. And I hadn't appreciated, because as I say, I'm not a researcher, just how difficult that was going to be.
Yes, I think it was Tim who said to me once that the other place that Tudor women will appear is in court records, if they're up to no good. But as Tim says, unfortunately, all the women in Tudor House were annoyingly well behaved.
I know, I'm gutted.
Don't appear in court records. So Tim and Rob, that was kind of the I don't want professional. That was where it came from in terms of funding and the official museum business. How did the two of you come to be involved? Rob, had you done research into the Tudors before, research into other periods? What had you done, and why were you interested specifically?
I knew nothing.
Like Jon Snow.
Opposite to a royalist is. I also didn't even know Elizabeth, Henry, or any of that crowd did, and had no interest. I sort of cut off interest in royals when I was about 10. My wife frequently meets a lady who lives in the past, not a ghost, but she lives in the past, at your tea rooms, and I think she felt that the endless work I was doing on cars and other projects in my retirement needed a bit of refreshing with history. She volunteered me to go along to that meeting with Jenny Waugh. I'd worked with Jenny Waugh, as some of you know, at Ombersley, where we also had a lottery grant for the home front, which again predominantly was women, of course. So seeing Jenny there gave me some confidence that although I knew nothing about that sort of research whatsoever, it could be quite exciting, which it turned out to be. So.
Excellent.
And
yeah,
Tim,
Jenny did a lot of
you?
work on the People's War project. Sorry, carry on, Anna.
Well, I was going to say, Tim, were you similarly volunteered by your wife, or were there other motivations?
Certainly not. No. My wife used to commonly say, before lockdown. You spend more time in those bloody archives than you do at home with us. Joking, I hope, but quite unfair, really. I only spent 4, 5, 6, 7 days a week there, so totally unjustified. No, I've been researching. I think in the first podcast said a bit about my past with Tudor House. Been researching for 2 years already by the time this project came up, and I'd done Eve Stock and Eleanor Shipway, and I was personally pleased with that. So I was a bit, really miffed when Tonya comes up and says, "We're going to do research properly now, Tim." Well, if that's the case, I'm going to have to be involved in that.
Sorry.
I joke, honest. I'd seen the West Midlands Museum's development thing that Tonya mentions about getting research, and I was sitting in a meeting with that in my hand with Tonya and co, and before I even got round to any other business, she'd already said, "I've applied for this, here's the application, and I'm pretty confident we're going to get it." So that was great, and I knew that, like I say, any research in Tudor House that was going on, I had to be there, even to keep an eye on it, let alone get involved. And so it was, and went to the first meeting with Jenny, and Rob was there. I think we should also name a few other people, because it wasn't just Jenny, Rob and myself. Students, Adam and Alicia were there from the start. Lorna and Steve got involved.
I should just say that, interject that Adam, that you mentioned, who was our conservation intern working with Hales and Howe, who are based in Bristol, and they worked on the ceiling restoration. And during lockdown last year, because he was an intern and he joined the team too late, he couldn't be furloughed. So he was coming in. We occupied different ends of the building, so we weren't in the same area at all. But he was basically working on the conservation of the ceiling on his own for 3 months last year, scraping the layers of paint off the surface of the ceiling, the poor lad. But it paid off, all his research and all his hard work. He now has a job with Hales and Howe, working on old buildings, which is just the best outcome for any kind of project. That's what you want to see, somebody getting new skills and getting a job out of it at the end of it.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, because that also applies to myself, and I think Rob as well, that professionally neither of us had any archiving, research or historical experience at all, and Rob can correct me in a bit when I stop talking. But we start from very low bar, and we make small gains, get better and better, and ultimately we find the information that people add to the historic record, I hope, and certainly added to the Tudor House historic record, which is something. So like I say, we didn't need to be historians, archivists, or have any particular skills. It's such a broad topic that you'll find something that you're interested in and you can do. So you say, Tonya, that you can't deal with ancestry. I can spend hours and hours on ancestry, cross-checking it with Find My Past and Family Search, because they all have something slightly different. And if I think I've done something and I haven't been through all three, I know I haven't. I know I've missed something somewhere.
I get really impatient. I'm not a very patient person, and when I know that I need a bit of information, I just want it to appear. This is why I kind of didn't go to university and I haven't done a PhD. It's because I don't have the patience for it, and also I was fed up of being told what to read. So I just find it really frustrating, this constant cross-checking. So kudos to you. That is the main skill, I think, that a researcher and an archivist needs. It's patience. Props to you, to quote young people, for having it and doing it.
Yeah, and Tim is absolutely right. It has been so great that we've had two people who, I don't want to describe you both as totally clueless, that sounds a bit harsh, but what I mean is people who don't know huge amounts about the Tudors, haven't necessarily worked with those kind of records before, can go away and find out masses and masses and masses of information that is going to be on these new display boards in the museum, and is going to be sort of like the face or the walls, so to speak, of Tudor House now, which when we are eventually able to install them is really exciting. So what kind of records were you actually looking at, Rob, you mentioned before when you did sort of First World War projects, I imagine you were looking at local newspapers, census returns sort of thing. We don't so much have those, do we, for the Tudor period? So what kind of things were you guys looking at?
Because we concentrated on House 38, the northernmost one, as you say, the oldest, and did come across all sorts of old records. But the thing that I think shows how exciting it is for maybe people watching the podcast is this. We persevered because we knew the connection, but we weren't quite sure what the connection was, with Stourbridge School, which of course is a very old historical school, and we didn't know how it came to own it, but we subsequently found out. But by pestering a delightful person who was the librarian, and still is the librarian, an archivist at the school, we got a day there. And due to a meeting that I think was put together by Jenny, if I remember rightly, Pat Hughes for the first time. And she must have dropped about 50 hints that she'd like to come along with Tim and I, none of which I picked up. So as she was leaving and I offered to give her a lift home, she said, I have been sort of hinting. And to cut a long story short, Pat came with us. And even to achieve that, we had to circumnavigate the floods of Worcester, because she was one side of the flood and we were the other. But the point of the story is this. We got finally, after all this endeavour, to Stourbridge Library. And we had all the things that you archivists are used to seeing, you know, rent books and books that were in double Dutch that Pat and Tim so enjoyed looking at, etc., etc., etc. And then just out of a folder fell out this letter, and the letter was in the 1970s between the archivist at, sorry, it wasn't the archivist, it was just somebody at the museum in Worcester, and the headmaster, who turns out to be this uber archivist of the school, about the very property we were looking for. And whereas we could not rely on the letter being the story, of course, it so often is the case, it provided a framework that we could then attach rent books and these things that I couldn't read because they were in Latin and all that jazz. So when you said the other day about it, I think that's the sort of thing I find exciting. You know, you're not looking for that letter, because how could you possibly think that letter exists? And what I'd say to anybody doing this sort of stuff, that's what's so exciting about it. And that's why to be patient is a good thing. Something like that always does turn up, not be years down the line, but it always does turn up. And it's so exciting when it does. So there we are. That's my little story about that.
Yes, and actually you mentioned the Stourbridge Grammar School connection, and that's one of those things that really is really interesting, because I know we sort of laughed a little bit before about some of the kind of the tall tales that people in the kind of the early 1900s, 1910s were saying about Tudor House and its previous residents, but we always knew that there had been a connection between the museum, which is of course in Worcester, and Stourbridge, which is a few miles away and had sort of once upon a time been part of Worcestershire, so part of the county. It isn't now because of boring geography reasons. But we didn't know what that connection was. We just knew there was some sort of link. We didn't know why, we didn't know who, we didn't know when. And the two of you were able, through some very persistent sleuthing, to go off and prove that there was actually a connection. Like you say, you didn't know there was going to be this specific letter that you were able to find, but we knew something. It was sort of like there was an arrow pointing over there kind of thing, but we didn't know what was going to be over there. So again, really, really great to be able to have this research done, to be able to prove these kind of hunches and hints that we'd heard of over the years, but hadn't actually found any evidence for until now.
I think I'd take exception to the word prove there. I don't think if we put this in front of Sharma or Susanna Lipscomb or anybody like that, they would say we had proved it. In fact, even if we put it in a PhD, we'd probably get thrown out, because there is not a smoking gun that says this property was owned by Stourbridge Grammar School, there was a property in Friar Street, or in St Helens Parish, probably Friar Street, which was part of the chantry that the school had and subsequently sold. I find it very difficult to point to, one line that says, there you go, that was it.
Okay.
I mean, you'd have to be really, really sad to say it didn't, but I can't use the proof word there.
So I have the silly question here. What's a chantry?
Yes, it's a private chapel associated with St Helens Church. And what people used to do was pay priests to say prayers for their souls and for the souls of anybody else they cared to pay the money for. The basic idea was if you had people praying for you after you're dead, you spent less time in purgatory before going to heaven. I think I've got the terms right. It's a very Catholic thing. And St Helens actually had 3 chantries, and really annoying. One of them is documented and we know quite a lot about it. The other 2, we have no idea who wanted it set up in the first place and how they funded it, because they usually funded it by endowments, which meant either lump sums, which are fine, but inflation kind of kills off lump sums, and we're talking generations they're thinking, or property, which is where we think number 38 was part of the endowment.
I find it quite fascinating because the bits about my A-level history that I did that most fascinated me back in the mists of time was about Martin Luther and the Reformation, and this idea that you could buy indulgences and your way out of purgatory by paying people to pray for your soul after you departed was something he had absolutely no truck with. And part of the Reformation was to do away, or Luther's Reformation was to do away with that kind of practice. So to find Tudor House linked to it, it's nice to kind of be able to trawl the memory banks of my brain, dust off these bits of information and go, oh yeah, that's how we're linked.
Yeah, my favourite story about indulgences that we all know about the Reformation to one degree or another, and Henry VIII trying to become head of the English Church and succeeding and trying to get rid of idolatry and Catholicism. What does he do in his will on his dying deathbed? He funds a chantry.
Well, Henry still considered himself a Catholic. He wasn't doing away with Catholicism. He was just doing away with the Pope's interference and sending money to Rome. It's a bit Brexity, quite frankly, to put it in modern terms. Not wanting to send your money to another out-of-nation organisation, basically.
Still wanting all the benefits.
Yeah, until he died, Protestants had to operate fairly quietly because the official religion was Catholicism, just with Henry at its head, not the Pope.
Do we have anything more to say about the research that we want to talk about? Because I'm very aware that I said I'd probably only take about an hour of your time, and not that I'm not enjoying this, but you probably all got other things to do. So if there's anything else we want to touch on the research, or we can go straight in with going. And on that note, let's talk about symposium.
Another thing I need to say, right?
Yeah, go for it.
I would like to thank Tudor House Museum for changing my life, etc., etc. Smiley. There you go.
Perfect, lovely.
Hang on, my sarcasm radar is going off.
Beep, beep, beep.
No, in all honesty, it was a wonderfully enjoyable project. Learned lots of things, made lots of great new friends, and continue to do so.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Tim. I really appreciate you saying that, because you kind of, well, I kind of come up with these projects and then throw them at people saying, here you go, have fun, and then run away in case they don't have fun and they come and complain to me. So it's good to know that you did enjoy it. Thank you.
And it'll be really nice to get the whole research team gang, as it were, back together when, for the socially distanced reopening, whenever that ends up being. It'll be really nice to actually see people again and see the fruits of all the hard work, I think. So, yeah.
Fingers crossed, not too long.
Yes. We usually close up this part of the podcast by talking about something that we've been to, are looking forward to going to see. In the past, we've done one sort of local thing and one national thing, but obviously because of lockdown, everything is closed. So and most things are sort of online or TV, books, what have you. There's not a huge amount, sadly, that we can actually go and see at the moment. So because of that, we have reduced this section down to one cultural or heritage thing that we are all enjoying in this very strange moment. So Rob, would you like to go first, as it is your first time? What cultural / heritage thing are you enjoying in January?
It's always, having lived in this area for 40 or 50 years, it's always fascinated me going past that hexagonal toll house.
Yeah.
Barbourne. And the other day, Tim's got me into the habit of browsing that website, which is the Changing Face of Worcester.
Oh, it's a great resource.
These wonderful drawing, which I superimposed on there. And got in touch with them and got their permission to show it on Worcester Memories, which they gave me. And what I found fascinating this last year, I've been involved in doing much more history. Again, really out of getting to know Tim, we've researched so many dead ends. We decided to write a book of dead ends. It's been fascinating getting to the dead end. A common theme is that you meet some really knowledgeable, helpful people, which make that research, whereas not instant on the screen, there is a wonderful feeling of adventure, really, that you do. And somebody got in touch and they gave me a site for something called the Turnpikes Org. And Turnpikes Org has sheets and sheets of these. And what these are pretty well every toll gate in the country. There's tens of thousands of them, with their ordnance survey number, what they know of it, what the name was in the day, what the name is now. And but I couldn't understand, it didn't explain, an historian would have understood what some of the words meant, but I didn't. So I got in touch with the site, and they came straight back and wondered where my particular field of interest was, and then sent me the work in progress for Worcestershire. This was, it's so exciting that you meet people like Pat Hughes, like Tim, all sorts of people you meet, and they just freely give you stuff. I then ordered a 1 metre by 1 metre map, and then realised that that wouldn't go down well in our small cottage. I've hidden the map for a later day, and I started work on here just using a PowerPoint slide and Google.
Yeah.
And there's about 50 or 60 put on over coffee breaks. And I wrote again, because you tend to get into correspondence with these people. And I wrote telling them what I'd found, and found things contrary to what they had concluded, etc. And they came back and gave me another site, another database, which is everyone that actually has a house on it. Now, for the whole country, it's about 200 toll houses. So that's what I find exciting. You start off with this, wouldn't it be nice to see what that building was like? And you end up now with the vista for the whole country.
Yeah.
So.
Wow. I was grinning throughout you saying that, because it's a little known fact about Nancy Mitford, but her husband, whose name I forget, the family used to call him the old tollgater, because that was one of his pet subjects, and he would lecture them on it. So there you are. There's your link to aristocracy, Rob.
Probably gathered I'm not interested in links with it.
Well, as far as Mitford sisters go as well, that was quite a wholesome interest for their husbands to have, because some of them were married to people
really quite.
Yes.
Yeah. I know. No, Nancy's my favourite.
Yes.
And then
lovely
Deccan.
stories.
Sorry.
Oh, so on that note, Tonya, are you Mitfording? Is that your heritage thing, or is that a little extra bonus for us?
No, that was just a little extra bonus, one of the many random bits of information that my brain decided to store for no apparent reason. This is why I do quite well on quizzes. My cultural things, actually I've got two. The first one is that I've been watching the series about the Natural History Museum on Channel 5. Channel 5 are churning out some good history stuff at the moment, which is quite interesting. They've had an Alice Roberts series about towns, and now there's this one on the Natural History Museum, which I'm loving, because actually my first love is dinosaurs and fossils, and I am one of those people who walks along a beach or a bit of exposed path and my head is down because I'm looking to see what's underfoot, what I'm standing on, just in case there's any fossils. And my personal collection of them grows regularly, and I just love them. So to be, because I haven't been able to go to the Natural History Museum for over a year, to be able to be there, so to speak, within this programme and see what they're doing and see these incredible finds that they've got. But I've really enjoyed that. That's been my, I think it's on a Thursday evening. That's been my Thursday evening treat. So yeah, that's good. And then in terms of kind of what else I've been doing, my friend lent me some books. I had an operation just before Christmas, so my concentration levels have been shot. My normal reading is out. It's not working, you know. I can't get through George Eliot at the moment because I can't focus. So she lent me some books by Monica Dickens, who is the granddaughter of Charles Dickens. And they are about her various exploits in trying to find a role for herself, an occupation for herself in life, and not just be this lazy dilettante kind of girl. So she's in the one I'm reading at the moment, she's a nurse during World War II, and it's called One Pair of Feet, because that's what she used to say to patients. I've only got one pair of feet. As she was rushed around, and the stories of nurses training back in those days, and those starched cuffs that they would have to take off to perform a task and then put back on in case, you know, a doctor came round on the wards or they had to leave the ward. And she's just hilarious, and it's very much of its time in terms of language, but they're just fun, and they don't require me to exercise my brain too much, which has been perfect. That and children's books as well. You know, I've read The Dark is Rising and Box of Delight. So over Christmas I had a real kind of return to childhood season. So yeah, those are my cultural highlights at the moment.
Lovely. Well, A, that all sounds delightful, and B, I think when we are all back on site, I've only got one pair of feet, needs to be your motto as the museum manager.
I'm going to get it on a badge.
Yes, yes. Oh dear. Dim, what about you? What have you been up to this month?
Well, I wanted to give a shout out for the Worcester Library Services myself.
Hey.
Okay, you can't go in and get a book, but if you've got access to the internet, and we've discussed not everybody has, so I apologise to those who haven't, but they very quickly put things into place to ensure that there was plenty still going on. So for me, first thing that really struck me was that they had their ancestry.com and findmypast.com opened up. Normally you had to go in and use one of their computers to do it. Obviously we can't. So within days of the lockdown, the first lockdown, they'd done some deals and you could log into your library account and access Find My Past and Ancestry online from the, you know, the comfort of your own home, as it were. So researchers like myself and Rob and Pat Hughes didn't have to just sit there and read through old books and stuff. They could get on and do some real research, and I made some really good progress on Victorian occupants of Tudor House because of that. Oh, before I go, we should also say a shout out for Robin Whitaker, who helped on the research project. We mentioned Pat Hughes, but Robin was there as well, and he was much useful, very helpful, very friendly, and very knowledgeable. If you don't know, he used to be the manager of the archives some years back, and since retired and does his independent work now. But yes, I'd hate for him to listen on this and think, didn't I work on that project?
Thank you, Tim.
Yes.
So yeah, and it's not just ancestry and that. Another thing I like is something called RB Digital, which is their magazine subscription services. I'm a real cheapskate, and I've said that before on these podcasts. So much as I love BBC History Magazine and New Scientist and National Geographic and stuff, I do balk at paying £5.99 a month for these things, or £4.99 for New Scientist every week. But they're available for free on RB Digital. You just need to log in as your library account and set up an account in RB, and you get them every week or every month. And just this week, the latest BBC History Magazine came out, and a plug for some other research that we've done. They had an article on birds and feathers in the millinery business in Victorian times, and you see what I'm going with this, can't you, Anna?
Very handy.
Yeah, so I updated my millinery haberdashery trades document with some of the numbers they give. 200 million egrets were killed for their pristine white plumes.
Wow.
Things like feathers were worse 2 or 3 times their weight in gold at one point. And of course all the devastation to the populations as a result. But that's part of the trades work, which we discussed a bit last time, and hopefully we'll see the light of day in some shape or form in the future. So watch the space on that one. So a shout out for libraries, and there's other things of course, but those are the ones that I've had most benefit from.
Thanks,
And then I will
Tim.
finish up by pulling on Tim's sort of online bent and going slightly differently. I have really been enjoying an online exhibition from the TUC, the Trade Union Congress Library, that has been put together by Dr. Kathy Hunt, who some years ago supervised my dissertation when I was at Coventry University, and she has recently put together an online exhibition for the TUC about Mary Mcarthur, who was a woman trade unionist at the turn of the 20th century, who, like Richard Cadbury, who has an association with Tudor House, she was very I don't want to say interested in, she really wanted to help people as much as possible, particularly working class women, and she set up various women's trade unions and was extremely involved in a number of strikes, getting women decent pay, decent working conditions, quite a few in the sort of local Midlands area, but also all over the country as well. And a sort of semi-local link, we mentioned Stourbridge earlier, in the 1918 general election, so the first general election in which some women could vote and women could stand as parliamentary candidates, she stood as the candidate for Stourbridge, which was then in Worcestershire. Unfortunately, she didn't win. She lost her election, but still a very interesting lady, and certainly someone worth knowing more about. And if you want to go and see that exhibition, as I say, it is online, so you can do that, and I will put the link in the description. So for those of you missing your museum and exhibition specs, it is possible just about to do some of it online, but it's not quite the same as being in a museum. So hopefully by the time we come to do next month's podcast, we will finally be able to give some sort of date as to when you can come back to Tudor House, at least.
We hope so, but let's just see. Like I say, there's no point railing against it. We just have to wait and see how it all pans out.
No, and in the meantime, it has been really fabulous to actually go behind the scenes a bit and hear how the research was done. So Tim and Rob, thank you so much for your time today and telling us about it. Tim, we will see you next episode for another breakneck biography. And Rob, hopefully we'll see you online in some form at Tudor House again, but if not in the flesh, in person, whenever that's allowed. But thank you both very much. It has been really, really good. And we'll see you next month.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Inside the Museum is recorded and produced by Tudor House Museum as part of our Revealing the Past project, which is kindly funded by the National Lottery Heritage Fund. The original idea came from Frankie Ekentap. The music in this episode was by Kevin MacLeod. You can follow us on social media at Tudor House Worcester, or visit our website www.tudorhouse.org.uk, where you can also find Tim's blog.